Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and the focus of today's maintenance check on my worms is this bin right here. It's the oldest of my active bins. Hey Siri, how many days have elapsed since October 14th?
It was 198 days ago.
So this bin is 198 days old, and it was neck and neck with a couple older bins. Those bins no longer exist. The material that was in those bins was joined into this container here, and the worms that came out of those two bins have made their way into the new bins that have been getting launched down here on the bottom. So if all goes well today, maybe we'll be able to harvest the castings out of this container, move the last of the worms out here, and then start treating the contents of this bin much like this. Remove the label, treat that as a done session, and just start treating that material as sort of castings that are on standby, ready to be used, but at the same time, they're kind of undergoing this final attempt to bait out any remaining straggler worms that might have stayed in the material, or any baby worms that might hatch out of cocoons that were in the material. So in the case of this material, it's been in this bin for a couple weeks now. There's a little pile of stuff there to attract any sort of newly hatched baby worms or straggler worms that got caught up in the material when it was harvested. So that's the same stage that I'd like to get the material in this bin to, and that'll begin with trying to pull out the feeding zone, which was loaded up 7 days ago with fresh food, to try to lure out more and more worms from the material. Those new worms will go down there to supplement the population that's down here in my newest bin, which is only a week old at this point, and that'll give it a nice jolt of additional population, as well as whatever uneaten food gets brought over there. It'll almost be like a feeding for that bin as well. So I'm going to start out by throwing a glove on, seeing what we could do about extracting worms from this bin. Who knows? Maybe we can even call it a done deal with this bin at 198 days, and start thinking about the material that's in there as amendment for the garden soil outside. All right, let's get to work. I have only this tub and my glove for today's work, or at least I'm hoping that that's all it's going to take, because if everything goes as hoped, we'll scoop out the worms and make the judgment call that the remaining compost in that bin is done. Maybe has some straggler worms in it, maybe has some cocoons that are going to hatch out. Set up a similar little baiting environment and let the material rest, and then relaunch these worms that we excavate. There is always that possibility that we're going to go in there, we're going to pull out worms, but we're still going to find that the material in the bin is still very heavily populated, and that there might be another round of migration to facilitate with a fresh load of bed and a fresh load of food. So if it goes that way, I'll bring down food, but I'm still hoping that we could pull this off today without having any food. So let's see how it goes. I'm going to go get that bin now. Alrighty. So what we're seeing here, after we remove the top layer of cardboard, is the kind of a little distinction here between one side and the other. The one side has the plastic, is where we're feeding, where we're, with the plastic, promoting the collection of moisture that tries to evaporate so that it gets captured, condenses on the plastic, and drips back down. So we've got one side of the bin that's nice and cozy and moist, so as to make it more and more appealing, and it's pretty cool. The plastic bag, I don't know if it's static or what it is, but a couple worm cocoons right there. I always seem to find a couple right there on the plastic when I peel it off, and I wonder how it is that it even sticks there. This piece of paper is apparently the popular spot, immediately beneath the plastic, where the moisture's dropping down. So that's definitely the place to be if you're a worm. Nice and moist and cozy. And what a drop in the level. It's amazing. So I'm thinking, yeah, there were a lot of worms in here last time we checked. And that was why we reloaded the feeding zone. But it does seem like our efforts were not in vain, because the food has dropped significantly, the level. You can now see the piece of cardboard that was placed in here. It's one of my little things that I used to do, but I haven't done lately, so I thought it would be like a little sort of fun revival of one of my old things, was to always separate these new feeding zones from the finished castings with a piece of cardboard. And usually you would look in here and the piece of cardboard is just chewed up. I mean, if we pulled it out, it would probably be the case. But just in case we've got to do a reload on the feeding here, I'd rather try to preserve it and keep it in place. So let's not tear the cardboard out just yet, unless there's a good reason to. But before we check the feeding zone to see how many worms we were able to round up, let's take a quick inspection of the finished castings. You could definitely see right off the bat, just a little skim off the top of the surface reveals worms all throughout the material. And as nice as the material looks, it's beautiful castings, rich, dark, nice earthy smell. I don't see any food chunks in it or anything like that. I mean, okay, here and there I see something, shell of a chestnut or something. Here's some bedding. So yeah, there's stuff in here. I guess if you take the time to look, they're going to find little bits of stuff in there still. And if it was only that, then that would be fine. I would call that as a done deal in a finished batch. But since there's also so many worms still hanging out in this stuff, I believe we're definitely going to be reloading the feeding zone once we finish here. The material has a nice dampness to it, and I know we're very close to, or maybe even right at the point where we had the plastic covering. So this material is nice and moist, as it should be, because we're promoting the nice recirculation of moisture on this side of the bin. So it's no surprise that the worms are hanging out in that part of the compost. But I feel good that we're able to jostle it up a little bit, aerate it, and hopefully promote its drying out. Because right now it is quite damp. As we start working our way out, it's still a little bit damp, but definitely not as damp as over here where the moisture is recirculating and all the feeding is going on. As I start to work my way away, about halfway across, the material definitely has a more crumbly nature to it, but it still kind of clumps. It still has enough moisture content that it jumbles together pretty readily. But this stuff, I bet if you left it to air out a little bit, it would dry and become a nice crumbly consistency. But it's not so important. It doesn't matter to me so much. If it's a little bit more damp, then that's fine. Here's that's the telltale of a nearly ready to hatch cocoon, is that it's become very dark in color. Oh, I can't believe I was able to kind of spot where that fell. Now I can't see it. I just saw a very dark colored cocoon. Looked like it could have been on the brink of hatching. And I'm sure if I were to slow down here a little bit, I'd probably see a fair number of cocoons in here. It's a nice big batch of fresh vermicompost. So I think since we're going to be reloading this feeding zone and trying to spur on the ongoing migration of these worms out of this compost so that we can use it, we'll just kind of follow through here and do a little bit more of this turning of the material. Here, the more dry stuff that's on the top and along the edge, and on the far end, is going to benefit too from being combined with some more damp material and help it all sort of level off in terms of its moisture content. As we make our way out here, there's a little sprout decided to try to grow, but I guess that's not going to happen now. It's just worm food at this point. And there's stuff in here, leaves, the stems of leaves at least. Yeah, so I mean, you still see worms here and there. I just saw one. There's one. But that's really the only one, right? We're starting to get to the point where the material is getting depopulated exactly the way we need it to, so that we can use the material in the garden. Not to say that it needs to be depopulated before it goes into the garden, because hey, if all these worms were to suddenly show up in my garden, it would only be a benefit to my garden, and it wouldn't be doing any harm to the worms. In fact, it would be sort of a bonus for them to be able to live out their lives out in nature. Although they're definitely, kind of spoiled here in my wormery. There's no danger from predators. Pretty steady supply of decent food, and cozy bedding and grit and everything else you need. Everything that a worm could want for. So anyway, the point being that if I were to just use this stuff as is right now, and all these worms ended up in my garden would just benefit from having those additional worms in it. So I like how this stuff looks. I also wonder if I might benefit from covering up more of the container. I don't want them to want to stay in here, and that's why the idea was to make this side where the feedings are occurring the nice, damp, cozy place to be. So let's see if we could just skim off a little bit of this bedding, because if it's not got worms in it, and it doesn't, I'm not interested in bringing it over. I'd really like to just bring worms over. So once we get this little bit of a skim off the top, we'll be able to drop pretty much the whole contents of what's in here into this tub. And you can see there's pretty much whole pieces of veggie that was placed in here, the stems of some sort of veggie. And there's worms in here for sure. Nice well-fed worms, that's for sure. And leaves, bedding and stuff. Plenty of castings in here too. So let's just see how many we're able to extract out of here. Maybe one more handful. Pretty good number of worms in here. Guess maybe one more handful left in here. Just scoop it all together. Oh, now my cardboard partition is dropping. I was trying my best just to keep it right where it was so as not to disturb it, but now we can take a look at it, I guess. It's holding up pretty good. Usually the very bottom of it gets completely chewed up. But I like the way it really maintained a nice, neat partition between what I'm considering as the finished castings and the feeding zone. So I wonder if we can reuse that. I think we should be able to. It's in such good shape, I think we'll definitely be able to reuse it. So, get these little guys back in here. So I'm going to scoop just a couple more of them out. If they're right there in open view, they're going along for the ride. Let's give these little guys a moment to hang out here, enjoy the bright light. As a result of that, they'll all squirm down deep into the material, but that'll give me a few minutes to run outside and get some more bedding, because my supply of leaves in here has run out, and we're going to need that to rebuild this feeding zone. And naturally, I'm also going to need to bring a few morsels of food down from the freezer to rebuild their feeding zone too. So I guess I'll just let this thing run here for a while so we can get some squirming footage of these guys retreating from the light. But I won't be long. I just need to run where to the outside bag to get the leaves and to the upstairs freezer to get enough food to rebuild this feeding zone. So, whatever. These guys will be totally out of view by the time I get back. That's for sure. All right, I shall return. It took me a couple minutes to go get that box reloaded, so we've got our box now full of leaves. So let's get this feeding zone reestablished, get these guys back on the shelf, and they're going to be pressing well into the 200 some odd days, because now only 2 days away from being a 200-day-old bin. So I don't know why. Carries like a little stigma in my mind for some reason, thinking, hey, does it need to take that long? And maybe just, what I need to tell myself is, yeah, it does take that long, depending on the circumstances. And in this case, whatever the circumstances might have been, if you want to go quicker, there's always options, right? You can always blend the food. You could always have a greater number of worms. You could always optimize the temperature for them, right? It's been all winter. It's been chilly down here. It's only finally becoming cozy and warm. So it's not their fault. I could definitely tune the variables to make it a more efficient, quicker composting setup. That's not really the key. The key in my case is always as cheap and as simple as possible. So cheap is kind of obvious. There's nothing here other than kitchen scraps and worms that I've bred myself, so it didn't cost me a dime. Except I had to purchase the container that we're working in, right? But yeah. There's a cocoon. I guess they're pretty much everywhere. I just need to slow down and look. That's the thing. I just never really take the time. And I've just never had such favorable conditions for seeing them either, with all this moisture as a result of the plastic being on top. All right, let's drop in. And if I'm not mistaken, there are still a fair number of worms hanging out in this material, so I'm trying to decide how much to load into here. A couple handfuls for sure. Got a pretty consistent, steady layer of material here across the top. This will do. Let's use this little bit of coffee that I bought down from upstairs to cover up. Topping this off is going to be a little bit of grit, just to help things along. And here, I think somehow just reusing some of these pieces of paper that we've got here, like this one with the huge gaping hole in it, as well as this piece here, which also has a big hole in it. Why don't we just use these somehow to cover up the feeding zone? I guess aid in the retention of moisture down in there. A little bit, but certainly not to the extent that the sheet of plastic provides when it rests on top of all of this. So here again, I guess we'll just try to maintain the same section that was covered. Again, once again, we'll only cover up this far edge where the feeding was just applied, where we want the worms to congregate, and allow for further evaporation out here of the rest of the bin. And I guess these couple pieces of cardboard would count as minimum. I'm not doing much, so all right, time to release our little friends. Let's get going. Okay, here comes the bin. It's a week old. It was launched off with a pretty good number of worms. No feedings yet, other than the food that was part of building the bin. So really my first chance to check out how things are progressing in here. Pretty good moisture collecting here on the top of this newspaper, which often attracts worms. I'm a little surprised not to see worms congregating on it. This time I'm sure they will. Let's see. Here we've got just castings all across the top. I could see cocoon, a cocoon, cocoon, cocoons everywhere. They really seem to enjoy the moisture. I think I'm doing myself a huge service by having all this extra moisture happening in my bins. So maybe I don't want to tear everything apart. You know what I mean? I mean, we're here to release some worms. It'd be nice to see how things are progressing in here, but there was no one concentrated feeding zone where we're going to be able to say, hey, the worms must be right there where I know that I fed, because I know that I fed everywhere throughout the bin. So I guess that would actually provide us a fair sampling if we just took a peek in one particular place. So let's allow ourselves just that, just to see how things look in here. For a 1 week old bin, which was populated with a lot of worms admittedly, you would definitely expect to just see, you know, whole pieces of food that's still in here from before. Is that food? Some sort of, I don't know what, piece of bread maybe? And bedding, paper, cardboard, stuff like that. Worms throughout the material, but it also seems like there's just a good thick layer of castings in here already. Now I can't forget, I gotta remind myself that when these worms were brought over, just like we're bringing these guys over, they're being brought over with a whole bunch of castings as well. So this is a little bit deceiving. These castings were not all created in this bin. A lot of them were transported in here when the worms were brought over. But either way, it's definitely got some nice consistency to it. Nice and moist. The worms look pretty cozy, hanging out in it. Plenty of material in here. Lots of bedding material, leaves, cardboard, down beneath the castings with worms in it. So we've got a nice setup here. Let's not disturb them any longer. Let's do what we came here to do. Let's release these worms. Let's make sure we didn't leave anyone behind. Okay. I always like to spread them out so that they've all got unobstructed access straight down into the material that they're being introduced into, instead of just piles of worms sitting on the surface for so long. This way any worm that feels they want to dive can dive. And I guess with these bright lights they're probably going to do so in a pretty short period of time, so let's allow that to happen, give them a few minutes, and we can cover things up. Well, I think for all intents and purposes they've all gone out of view at this point. I mean, I could see one here, see a couple over there underneath the material, but they've pretty much gone ahead and squirmed out of view in record time. So I think it would make good sense at this point. Instead of just closing up shop here as is, I think that the food that came over with these guys is a great thing to sustain them for a little while. It's all partially broken down food that they should be able to break down further quite readily. Stuff that's been in the breakdown process for some time now. But I think supplementing it with a little bit of more food, because, hey, we got a whole bag of it right here, ready to go. Might as well just dig a little bit of hole and treat this as a feeding as well while we're at it. So I'm just checking out this peach pit here. It almost seems like they've kind of made their way into it or something. It's interesting, like its fibers are starting to peel off too, I think, unless I'm seeing something else there. So that's just another one of those kind of experimental things. We'll see how far that peach pit progresses over time in this new bin. So that being the center of the bin, that's usually where I customarily at least put my feedings. So why don't we stick to custom and load our feeding down into here. You can see some of this old bedding from the initial build of the bin. It's got a nice moisture level to it. There's an abundant amount of it. Right beneath it, there's some cardboard pieces. But I think I'm going to add a little bit of bedding anyway. I'll sprinkle a little bit of the bedding down below as a platform to put the feeding on. We'll put a little bit on top after we're done. Okay, we've got banana in here and lettuce, apple, all kinds of goodies for them. Before we cover up with the bedding, why don't we include a little bit of grit. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. And then just a little bit more fresh bedding across the top to cover up. I guess if we still had a little bit of coffee, I could have used that as well, but I only bought down a little bit and that's gone from reloading the feeding zone previously. This is some of the food, those scraps that came over when we extracted the worms. So I guess I'll just keep them where the focus of the feedings are going to be happening for the time being, down here in the middle. Okay, this looks pretty nice. It always feels good when you check in on one of your new bins and things are looking pretty decent. The worms look cozy, the material looks good, and I think this was a pretty smooth sailing launch of additional worms going into our newest worm bin. So I've only got a few things to put away here. We'll cover up and clean up, but you know, that's boring. I don't want to keep you around for that. I'll just take this as a quick opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for sticking around and watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember, as always, remember to give me a thumbs up and also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.